Bitcoin has been enjoying renewed attention this week thanks to the government shutdown in the United States, pushing people towards store of value assets like gold and Bitcoin. But don't worry if you're bummed about missing all the big moves. I'm going to show you how to never miss another rally again. Stay right there. Hi, I'm Paul with ArcisFX with your Bitcoin update for the week. This is Bitcoin 4-hour chart. On Monday, Bitcoin put in new all-time highs of about 125,762, although that varies depending on what exchange we're looking at. Because if you go to Coinbase, you'll notice that the all-time high for Bitcoin is 126,296 as opposed to 125,762. So a bit of old-fashioned classic disparity between some of the exchanges there with Bitcoin, perhaps giving a bit of an insight into the supply and demand dynamics on different exchanges, and how in times of high volatility, which can put a bit of pressure on either of those factors, which can of course lead to a little bit more of a price difference between exchanges than typical. Now you'll notice on this Bitcoin 4-hour chart that of course since Bitcoin broke out of this diagonal trend line at the end of September, about a week ago, Bitcoin has made a very strong recovery as it was last up in this range back in August, and of course we've since passed the previous all-time highs of 123,731. So we've added a couple of $1,000s onto Bitcoin's value, but how Bitcoin progresses from here is dependent of course on the basic buyer-seller dynamic. You'll notice that I haven't turned this resistance zone yet to support, as it's quite a tall order for Bitcoin to try and find its feet this high up, and a more significant retrace would most likely be on the cards. However, of course, we are dealing with slightly unprecedented times with the US government shutdown, having a lot of people running to store of value assets like Bitcoin and gold, and it'll be very interesting to see how Bitcoin's price action reacts when the government shutdown is finally resolved. But because this move, which started at the end of September, isn't particularly organic in terms of since the 1st of October, we haven't been really checking a lot of these levels with any kind of curiosity, meaning you'll notice that Bitcoin here on this 4-hour chart broke above the 4-hour 200 MA, touched it, retested it, as it should do, but once it broke out of this diagonal trend line, highlighting the break of this downtrend, which the price action was in since August, you'll notice it didn't check it. It hasn't come back for a bullish retest yet, and it's pretty much flew by the point in control as well, busting straight through it and only really briefly tapping some of these minor ranges on the way up. And when you see that, it's a little bit like a house of cards, and you have to be very, very cautious and make sure you're not chasing this. So this isn't support for me until Bitcoin can form a solid foundation up at this level, which I think is probably quite unlikely. As you can see, there's 118k floor is looking pretty tasty for a retest. And of course, if you look at this in the point of view of typical retracements you expect in crypto, this would essentially equal about a 45-50% retrace for Bitcoin, which is exactly the sort of thing you want to see coming off conditions being quite oversold on this time frame and higher time frames. But also we have a little bit of divergence, of course. If you notice that the price action is still ascending while the RSI is descending, that could indicate that we could have another move up from here, which would then make this base at around 124k, this resistance zone, a little bit more palatable to be converted to support. But of course, we have to wait and see if we do get another leg higher. But if we don't, 118 would seem to be the line in the sand to watch. But again, interesting times with the government shutdown, so Bitcoin could continue up from here. But again, the problem is it's not very easy to trade that because it's very much like a house of cards coming up like this without particularly organic price movement. As you can see here on the left, this is the sort of thing we want to see. Up, down, slightly higher low, up, down, up, confirming all of these levels. This isn't doing that, so it's very high risk at the moment. So don't chase this. Unfortunately, it's just a waiting game to wait and see what happens. Let's just have a quick look at the options for a potential retrace from here if Bitcoin doesn't manage to break these fresh all-time highs in the next few days. So on this chart, this is again the 4-hour chart, we've got these key retracement areas. Now, I do this to visualize potentially the sort of retrace I can expect, and obviously this upper retrace at around 120k, which is pretty flush with this resistance area which was put in place back in July. If Bitcoin came back down to this box at around 120, 121 and then bounced from there, that would be very bullish. And likewise, if you look at this lower box that is back down at previous local resistance, I need to update this, at around 115k, that would be actually quite bearish for Bitcoin, because that would mean Bitcoin has to put in a more significant 70 to 80% retrace, essentially giving back all of these gains in order for a bounce from here. But there is confluence with the daily 50 MA, and of course the 4-hour 200 MA down here, but Bitcoin has managed to put in a bullish retest of that, meaning this is quite unlikely. This isn't off the cards, but if you really want to find the middle ground, the most reasonable thing, there's 118k again, this box right bang in the middle, suggesting that this is the most logical place for Bitcoin to come down and retest. But we do know that Bitcoin is very bullish at the moment because of what's happening in the United States. Therefore, a bounce from here at 120k could be in play. So I would say that 120k, 118k are the areas to watch. If you're super bullish on Bitcoin, then you can look to start making an entrance here. But if you're a little bit more conservative, conservative like me, this, of course, is the area to watch. But you don't have to choose between these two. You can start to scale in. You could come in with 20% of your intended position here. And then if you get a bounce, super duper, great. But then if Bitcoin continues down, once you've entered your position, then you can come back in here and scoop it up like this. Really nice. And also that affords you a little bit more control because, of course, if you enter this position and Bitcoin descends lower from here, all you then need, if you enter again, is for Bitcoin to come up to the halfway point in order for you to break even, because you can essentially use the profits from this position to offset the losses from this. So scaling in is a pretty good strategy overall. And I wish I could give you some more concrete information about which of these boxes Bitcoin is most likely to retrace to. But we're living in unprecedented times. And unfortunately, Bitcoin's price action is at the moment is being dictated by these random changes in wind direction coming out of the United States. But those are a couple of retrace areas. And this is Bitcoin 12-hour chart with a similar hypothesis with the price action in this ascending channel. Now, if Bitcoin does continue up from here, of course, we could be looking at this nice little pocket at around the end of October with the 1.618 fib level. That's around 133k. So we could very easily see that. Could very easily see that happening, something like this. So that could happen. But again, if we do get a retrace, the first line in the sand is a little bit higher up. We've got around 120k here, which is represented by this, the middle line of this rising channel, which is confluence with this box here at 120k. So there's nice confluence there. You also have then this box at the point in control here at 118k, and that does seem like a more viable option. But then, of course, you've got the deeper potential retrace lower down, right back here to confirm the SR flip of this diagonal trend line. But that is all the way back down at around 113k, and I think you can probably agree that's not particularly likely at the moment. However, with all of this bullish fervor from Bitcoin, you just have to remember when the price action comes up this quickly, it's more likely to come down that quickly, as opposed to slightly more organic price action, which allows Bitcoin to build a foundation, a solid foundation, step by step as it goes up. Because Bitcoin hasn't done that, the reality is that we can look at probabilities that it will bounce at area 1 and area 2, but area 3 isn't completely out of bounds because of the way Bitcoin has moved up. And if the government shutdown is resolved in the United States, or there's some bearish news, we could see this tank quite quickly. So caution here, scaling in might be the best game to play at the moment. And this is a cleaner look of the Bitcoin 12-hour chart, pointing out, of course, that the hidden bullish divergence, which we highlighted last week, has played out perfectly. But you'll also notice we are cooking on the RSI as well, very high up, which would give you an indication that a retrace should be happening pretty soon. But today, briefly, I just wanted to touch base with how you can see these moves from Bitcoin coming and enter at the right point. Because a lot of traders will be hearing Bitcoin's going to the moon right now, and they'll be looking to enter around this area, which is extremely high risk. So let's take a look at what you can use as confirmation to come in at a lower price point before moves like this occur. So the first thing you'll notice, of course, that we have these lines in the sand, which I put in back at the end of September to try and give me bullish confirmation either way of whether Bitcoin was going to recover from here or head down. So for me, if Bitcoin descended below this line, that would be bearish confirmation for me, and that, of course, I wouldn't be entering any altcoin longs or even entering a Bitcoin trade because of that. However, because Bitcoin did not do that and it managed to form a foundation at this level, we broke in the other direction, and you see here with this green circle, the second, of course, Bitcoin breaks above, out of the range it was stuck in, following this retrace, then, of course, buyers start entering again. And if you jumped in at around this area after the first candle body close, if we just zoom in and see what that looks like. Good look for the candle body close. There it is. And then come back in on the retest, buy that second candle, and then away you go. And that's one very straightforward way of waiting for bullish confirmation and then entering. But if you're a bit worried and you're a bit concerned that the bears were still in control, then you could wait to see what happens when Bitcoin takes back the 4-hour 200 MA. So you're a little bit more risk averse than the people who had entered down here, because of course the price action could very easily just roll over like this. So you wait for confirmation of a break above the 4-hour 200 MA, and then you look for the bullish retest. And then we got that. The price action breaks above, it comes back down and gives us that retest. And if we just zoom in very straightforward, you can see it's a pretty spot on touch. So then you can enter there. Or if you have entered here, you can also enter again with more of your position as the bullish confirmations begin to stack up. Two textbook and clearly definable entry points for Bitcoin at the bottom end of this rally, which you could have entered on depending on your risk tolerance. However, of course, if you had waited for a break above this area, which was 115k, then you'll notice the price action did not give you a chance to enter and just flew all the way up from here. And likewise, when it broke 118k, didn't give us a proper retest either. So this area here and this area here in green were the two best plays to enter Bitcoin before the move. And again, if you think, well, okay, that happened this time, but it happens all the time. So here is the inverse head and shoulders we had back in the start of September, and then we get the breakout of the inverse head and shoulders, and then of course we have the retest. That's your entrance point with bullish confirmation, the breakout of this pattern, and then away we go. And that's how you do it. But the reason why I'm talking about this now is because if you've missed this, you need to wait for the retrace, and then you come in again. And as we've been talking about the potential retrace zones, that's what you're waiting for, and then you come in again. You want to be buying red, not green. And though it might seem very frustrating because Bitcoin feels like it's going to the moon at the moment, it will come down, it will give you a retrace. It always does. Just be patient. And again, this is a slightly different scenario, but we were previously talking about what I wanted to see from Bitcoin for a recovery following this retrace. And we were saying that price actually needed to break back out of this channel and then give us the bullish retest on the flip side. It would likely then bounce from there. And that's exactly what happened. Now, we had this fake out here where the Bitcoin looked like it was going to recover and do that, but couldn't hold it, and therefore it crashed back down. So it's not 100% guaranteed. You do get these fake outs, you do get these bull traps, you do get these bear traps. But nonetheless, once we do have the recovery and the price action bottoms out down here, when we do get the break of this upper channel trend line in confluence with the 4-hour 200 MA on this, the 6-hour time frame, you'll see we get that nice solid bounce and perfect bullish retest before ascending from here. The bulls are coming in because we've had a break of the 200 MA, and the bulls are coming in because we've had a break of this upper channel trend line. 2 points of confluence, and that was enough to propel the price action higher, or rather that was enough to give traders bullish confirmation, but that Bitcoin was going to ascend higher. And of course, we also had a higher high surpassing this previous one before the bullish retest, giving us additional confirmation. That's what you need to be looking for in order to benefit from the next rally from Bitcoin. But don't worry, there will be a next rally. You simply need to wait for the retrace and then look to come in again with bullish confirmation, whether that's 120, 118, or a little bit further down. But just to check in with the money flow, this is Bitcoin Dominance 4-hour chart. Now, we have been in this bear pennant of sorts. Bear pennant is actually good for altcoins, as obviously when Bitcoin Dominance is going down, that allows money to flow into the altcoin market. And we have had a break lower, which could be indicating improved altcoin trading. We of course need to see a lower low as well to confirm this move from an uptrend to a downtrend. But as Bitcoin has stopped ascending, people are now starting to look at entering altcoin positions again. As when Bitcoin is just going to the moon, it's very difficult to enter an altcoin position because the higher Bitcoin goes, the more chance it's going to retrace. And then when it does retrace, it's going to wreck your altcoins. So people, of course, are waiting for Bitcoin to pull back a little bit, and then they start to enter their altcoin trades. And Bitcoin Dominance is being reflective of that today. And if we look at our multi-time frame analysis, we can see, let's just clean that up, we can see that even though we've had a bit of a pullback on the lower time frames, we are oversold with bearish divergence on the daily, 12-hour, the 6-hour, and the 4-hour, with some bearish divergence also coming up on the 2-hour chart. But as I always like to do at the end of Bitcoin Update, just to touch base with the altcoin setup, just one. We'll cover more on Thursday with altcoin picks, where we'll have 7 or 8 to look at, just as a little bit of a teaser for that video later in the week. But Pepe is in a pretty good position at the moment to support either or direction from Bitcoin. So what do I mean by that? So if Bitcoin does head higher, this is a meme coin, remember, so it does like to move on bullish momentum. So if Bitcoin does continue to go up from here, even though it's extremely high risk, you could see Pepe break out of this upper diagonal trend line, including the 200 MA here, and then that gives you a potential bullish play. So you could maybe see something like this, come back down in the retest, and then away you go. So the first play is to wait for a breakout entry of this upper diagonal trend line. We're not quite there yet, which would be supportive if Bitcoin remains bullish. But more likely is that if we get a pullback from Bitcoin, that will push Pepe potentially back down to support, and we haven't retested that since April 2025. So there'll be a lot of buyers coming in this area. So if Bitcoin does give us that retrace, Pepe is going to give us a nice support play. Meaning, of course, this altcoin is very supportive of either direction for Bitcoin right now, as it's right in the middle. And if Bitcoin goes up, we'll get the breakout. If it goes down, we'll get the support entry. So keep an eye on Pepe, set some alerts, but we'll look at this in more detail at the end of the week. But that's it for now. I'm Paul with ArcisFX. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop us a comment. I'll be back on Thursday for altcoin picks, as I said, and Friday for my weekly live stream where you can ask questions, get me to check out tokens you're thinking of trading, and to see how Bitcoin has fared at the back end of this week. And also, if you're not in our private group, you can check out the link in the description, as we'd love to have you. It's a really great community. Catch you in the next one.